Thank you, Joni. So before I start, I just want to officially thank Joni. And before I go anywhere, I always have a lot of good materials to read about the place I'm going so I can show up informed. And I was really struck by Joni's award that she won last year. I don't know if all of you know it. It's called the Top Hat Award. And she got it not only for her work in the industry, but for her philanthropic work outside the industry. And one of them, they listed like 4 different major efforts that she's been involved in. But one of them was taking old sheets and bedding from the hotel industry and getting it stored and then shipped out to all sorts of different animal centers for cats and dogs for their bedding. So I thought that was incredibly thoughtful and resourceful and scrappy. So let's just give her applause for that award. So I'm Nella Domenici, and I'm running for United States Senate. I'm running against Martin Heinrich, an incumbent. And today, I really want to thank you for having me. I have a strong interest in your industry, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment. But I also want to make sure you know I've been to lots and lots of events. I've been running since like January 20th in this campaign. And these tables are by far the prettiest tables we've had so far. Woo, yes. And it's really also these chocolate tulips that are really striking and look so delicious. So they kind of were the extra edge on these tables. I don't know who's responsible for these tables. You designed them too. Wow. I see. Okay. Okay. So I thought what I would do is whenever anyone meets me, they have like some very basic questions. And one of the basic questions is like, tell me a little bit about yourself so I understand who you are and what you care about in life and what your values are. Because you should understand the values of someone who's going to be your representative in Washington. And then people always say, why are you running for Senate? Because running for public office in this state or running for public office anywhere is a brutal experience. And then after I explain to them why I'm running, they want to know, well, what are you going to do for us when you get to Washington? So those are the 3 big questions I want to answer for you now. And then after that, we'll open it up to other questions that you may have. So first of all, who am I? What do I stand for? Where do I come from? I was born here in Albuquerque at 720 Monroe, which is really Monroe and Lomas. My parents are Pete and Nancy Domenici. My father was United States Senator Pete Domenici, who was the senator here for 36 years. And so I was born there at that corner, and I grew up there until I was 12. My father couldn't afford to keep a house in Albuquerque and in Washington, so he moved all 8 kids of us to Washington. So we went to Washington to be with our father as he served all of you in this room. Because we had 8 kids, and 8 kids in 9 years, we all had to be very, very helpful in our house, and we all had to work as soon as we could. So I actually got my first job before we moved out from Albuquerque. Down the street from my house was a lot that had a bunch of rocks, and I collected the rocks and polished them and sold them door to door. So I think people bought those rocks out of pity, but it was my first job, and it was really successful in my own little mind. So I had the privilege of graduating from Georgetown College. And part of my experience at Georgetown, one of my most important experiences was waiting tables. I worked at the restaurant that was the most popular restaurant for the students. So I basically got to wait tables on all my friends. After going to college, I decided I wanted to be a lawyer. Well, I'd always wanted to be a lawyer. And I went to Georgetown Law Night School, and I worked all during the day at a very kind of competitive, arduous law firm. So there was a lot of energy that went into paying for my school as I went to school. I worked in a law firm for a little bit, but I had the joy of doing some business work, and I thought, I really like business better than law. So despite my education in law, I decided I would apply to business school. And so I applied to Harvard Business School, and luckily they let me in. And you know, when I went there, I thought I didn't know how I would thrive. I knew it would be really hard and really competitive. But nevertheless, I just stuck to my routine and doing my homework all the time. And a couple wonderful things happened. So my daughter here, Alessandra, I was pregnant with her my entire second year. And when I graduated from Harvard Business School, I went up to stage 9 months pregnant with Alessandra with a huge, huge cap and gown, the ones the guys wear, because the ladies weren't big enough for me. And I had the extraordinary pleasure of being given an award called the Baker Scholar Award, which is the award for the top 5% of the class. So I graduated 9 months pregnant and at the top of my class. And that moment really was a big, big part of my foundation for life, because I said to myself, I can be a really wonderful mom, but I can compete in this men's world and I can excel. And I made a promise that I was going to be a good mom, be a great mom, hopefully, and fight my way up in the business world and compete and rise so I would be a role model for other women. So I spent, thank you. So I spent the next about 35 years climbing my way up from the very bottom in finance. I did things like mergers and acquisitions. I helped companies raise debt. And then I eventually became the CFO of a very large company. But as I was climbing up that ladder, I want to tell you all about my first job, my first real job where I had real responsibility. So yes, I was living in New York, and I was in charge of helping commercial office buildings and hotels raise their debt. So I got to work in your industry for 4 years, from about age 26 to 30. And I helped many hotels that needed debt. I helped them raise their debt. But to help a hotel raise debt, you have to understand all the details about that hotel. So you have to understand the seasonality of the hotel and the cyclicality of the hotel. And you have to understand their labor issues and how hard it is to match the flow of labor with the flow of demand. And you have to understand the competition with other hotels in their neighborhoods. And you have to understand the importance of that city that they're in or that community that they're in. So for 4 years, I was really immersed in your industry, and I got to understand the wonder of your industry, because you bring such joy to people and such happiness. But I also got to understand how hard it is to run a hotel very, very well. But more importantly than that even, I gained a deep appreciation that hotels and your industry really provide people with a welcoming statement for their community. And so in that regard, I know all of you, you're the face of Albuquerque. You're the face of Albuquerque to other New Mexicans and to other Americans and to visitors from around the world. And to be the face of Albuquerque is a huge, huge responsibility. And it's extremely important to this city and this state. So when I found out I was going to get to come here today, I was just thrilled that I would be able to meet so many people on the team that works hard every day to create the face of Albuquerque and to welcome people from the whole world into our city. So going back to who am I? Sorry, I got a little derailed. But nevertheless, I continued to work in business for about 35 years. The pinnacle of my career was I was working at a large money management firm, and I had been 25 years exactly out of school. And they offered me the job to be the CFO there. And so because I had promised myself when I graduated from business school, I promised myself I was going to fight my way up. Becoming the CFO of a large company 25 years later was really, for me, finishing the swing, hitting the goal that I had. And since that time, I've really relocated back in Albuquerque, and I've tried to figure out how I could serve New Mexico. My parents served New Mexico. My aunts and uncles served New Mexico, and I always wanted to come back and serve this state. But the real question you probably all are asking is, why now? We understand you want to serve, we understand you love New Mexico, but why now? So first of all, I want to answer that question in a couple different parts. But I do want everyone into this room to really understand I deeply love New Mexico. And I have huge appreciation for its natural resources, right? It's oil and gas, it's minerals. Huge appreciation for the beauty, the mountains, the sky, which is so profound here. And the culture that we have, the multiple cultures that we have, and all of the hardworking people. So I want to make sure New Mexico unites all of its strengths and is the great state it can be. But I'm running now because New Mexico is in a crisis. We are in a very, very bad crisis. And I think you all might want new leadership because big problems are always fixed by changing leadership. And when I say we're in a crisis, you might wonder, what is the crisis? Let me just give you a few examples so everyone is on the same page. Because we are the worst state in education, and every single year for the last few years, we've gotten even a little more worse until we've hit the flat bottom. We are the worst state for crime, which is devastating, not only to our state, but it's devastating to the potential for all of you in this room to have people come into our state. People don't like to move, they don't like to visit, they don't like to spend time when they don't feel safe. But we could go on and on. We have, within education alone, we have the highest absentee rates, we have the worst literacy rates. Within crime, we're top 5 in homicides. We're top 10 in deaths due to alcoholism, deaths due to fentanyl. So these deep-rooted problems are really crushing our state. And unfortunately for all of you in this room, most of these problems are even worse in Albuquerque than they are in the entire state. So it's because we're in a crisis and because I love the state that I'm running, because I want to help get us out of this crisis. It's like we're at the bottom of the V, and I want to help raise us back up again. And to be able to do that, you have to be compassionate, you have to be a listener, you have to want to learn, you have to roll up your sleeves and deeply understand the problems. And so with that regard, I just want to give you one example of me trying to do that. I could give you many, but this one is probably the most illuminating about my values and my desire to fix the big problems here. So I told my team about a month ago, I want to go for a ride an entire day with a policeman. And there's only one place I'll go, only one. I'll only go to the war zone, the International District. And I'll only go at nighttime. So it took them a little while to figure out how that was going to happen. But within 2 weeks, I had that experience. So I showed up at 5 o'clock. I was in the front seat of a police car riding with the sergeant, and I finished my shift around 11:30. I don't know how many of you have been there into that war zone district, really inside it. But it was terrifying, shocking, and depressing. For the first 2 hours, we drove around, you know, they were calling in problems, but he didn't have to go jump for any of them. The first 2 hours, we were driving around block to block, and every single block for 2 hours was just filled with people stoned on fentanyl. And they'd be lying flat out on the sidewalk asleep in the middle of a front yard, sitting up against a wall. And what these policemen explained to me, which I didn't know, those little fentanyl capsules, you see them on TV in big bags. Each one is only 30 or 35 cents. You can't get anything in this world for 30 or 35 cents. And the average fentanyl addict, these policemen told me, only needs 6 a day. So that's $2 or $1.80, the same as a cup of coffee at Dunkin' Donuts. And the really aggressive addicts might use 30 pills a day, but not many. So even for those people, you're looking at $9 or $10. And I had 3 policemen who met with me every hour. We pulled over my sergeant and we talked to the other policemen. One of them had been a policeman here for 10 years, 1 for 9 and 1 for 6. So they really understood things. And they explained to me there's hardly any other drugs being used except fentanyl. It's so cheap, so abundant, so accessible. And nobody gets arrested for selling 50 pills or buying 80 pills. That's just everyday business up there. And here I was thinking, this is the Albuquerque where I grew up. And this is as bad as it possibly gets. But then, of course, we got a call, and we had to go to a home where a man with 3 guns was shooting across the street and trying to kill a woman on the other side. So about 7 police cars pulled up, and they had to figure out, it took a couple hours, how to get this man out of his home, how to get a search warrant. And all the policemen told me the same thing. We'll get the search warrant, we'll take him in tonight, and he'll be back out in a few days or a few weeks, and we'll see him personally, we'll get to know him, and he'll just keep cycling through. So that's our Albuquerque, and that is utterly, utterly, utterly unacceptable, and we have to change it. So the areas that I will focus on as your United States Senator will first be crime. And a lot of people think crime isn't something that a federal senator up in Washington is responsible for. They think crime is managed by local police. Crime in this city, crime in this state, involves a huge amount of federal attention. And this is why. Albuquerque has many cartels and many gangs and has huge fentanyl flow through. The federal government, the FBI, is responsible for all 3 of those problems. So you need a senator who's in Washington fighting for federal resources to come here to fight these big, deep-rooted criminal problems. The second area I'll focus on is the border. The border has been wide open for the last 4 years. Your current leaders have let it be wide open. That's why I suggest you need a change. In my first 2 weeks of announcing that I was running, I went to see the border. The border wall, it's really incredible. The problem is it's only halfway there and then it falls, and there's no wall at all for the other half of our border. It's just completely, completely wide open. Not only is our border halfway wide open, there are mounds of wooden beams waiting to be put up and built into a wall, but they're just sitting there waiting. And so we need a leader who will say, we need a secure border. We need a border with a wall. We need a border with laws that are enforced. We need a border with asylum principles that are realistic, that are not a sham. And when I went up to the border, most of the time I didn't see even one border patrol. There is a complete shortage of border patrol up there. And that's all federal money getting approved for federal border patrol. So all of these issues are the responsibility of your United States Senator. The third area that I'll focus on is cost of living. So I'm sure you all know New Mexico has one of the lower average family incomes in our entire country. Our average family income is sometimes 5th from the bottom, sometimes 6th from the bottom. So that means when food goes up in price and when gasoline goes up in price, it hurts our New Mexicans more than almost any other state. It's devastating. But the question is, who caused this and how do you change it and how do you fix it? So your current leaders in Washington voted for huge, huge spending packages. Most of those huge spending packages went for clean energy kind of products. And that energy spending on clean energy products is what caused inflation. And so our families in this state have the burden of increased cost of living because your federal leaders in Washington overspent for 4 years in a row. Inflation is also caused because energy is expensive. Energy doesn't have to be as expensive as it is. We are sitting on top of the Permian Basin, and our current federal leaders and our governor are not letting oil and gas be drilled at the levels it could be right now. So what you have is a state that's suffering. We're suffering because we have too much crime. We're suffering because we have too many people coming through the border, too much fentanyl coming the border. Interest rates are too high, causing the cost of living to go up. All of these problems are caused by your current leaders. The last two areas that I'll focus on is education and healthcare. But I want to talk about education for a moment, because we're really, really bad at education in this state. When people don't get a fundamental education, when they don't learn to read and write, their future is extremely grim. And my husband and I were very, very worried about this about 10 years ago. And so we started looking into how can we help? How can we bring equality and fairness to all these young children who are getting a terrible education? And we started something called Excellent Schools of New Mexico. It's a charter school umbrella organization. And Excellent Schools of New Mexico started out 7 years ago with a bipartisan board saying, can we go into the worst areas, the most underserved areas in this city? Can we go into them and start charter schools and let those kids shine and let those students get a great education? And everyone told us, don't even try, you'll never do it. Well, we said, thank you, but we're going to try. You have to try in life. You have to take on the hardest things because nobody else will if you won't. And so now we have 14 schools, 9,000 students in these charter schools, and semester after semester after semester, these young students in our charter schools are outperforming their peer public schools. So these students are proving to all of us in this room that New Mexico can fix its education, that we can give the gift of education to all of our children. So the last area I'll definitely focus on in a narrow level is mental illness. So in my family, we have serious mental illness. I have a sister who has schizophrenia. She got schizophrenia when she was about 18. And when she was diagnosed with schizophrenia, my father, your United States Senator, said, this is a terrible illness. People are ashamed of it. They're embarrassed to say they have it. People with schizophrenia are locked into the back of the house. There's no good drugs. There's no good health care for them. And my father said, I'm going to help my daughter, but I'm also going to help our country. Because what we experienced in our home was what thousands of Americans were experiencing everywhere else. But they didn't have great help, and they didn't have great solutions. So my father, this was about 40 years ago, he realized that one of the biggest problems with mental illness, well, two of them. One is the stigma. The stigma is so bad, and everyone's ashamed to talk about it. And he realized that he had a good brand. He was highly respected in Washington, highly. and highly respected here. So he realized his job was to be a voice for those who didn't have a voice, and his job was to use his voice to fight this battle. But the battle he fought was health insurance. At the time that my sister was diagnosed with schizophrenia, mental illness was not covered by health insurance. Can you imagine? And these illnesses would cost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to treat. And so he worked in a bipartisan way. He worked with Senator Ted Kennedy for 15 years. It took him 15 years to change insurance policy in this country so that all healthcare insurers had to cover mental health just like they cover physical health. And what he taught me in that journey was that courage is important. You should fight for the causes that no one wants to fight for. And number two, you should be a voice for those who don't have a voice. But number three, most importantly, as a senator, he taught me, do things in a bipartisan way. Because if you can work in a bipartisan way, you can make deep, deep-rooted change. And what's interesting is, both my father has passed away, and so has Senator Ted Kennedy. But I've had the wonderful pleasure of working with Ted Kennedy's son, Patrick Kennedy, who is one of the leaders in this country in fighting for improved mental health. So that's a battle I've been fighting, and as a senator, absolutely, I would continue to fight it. So those are the big platforms that I would focus on. But the more integrated platform that relates to all of these gets back to business. It gets back to what I studied and what I did and my true passion as a professional. New Mexico needs more jobs. It needs better jobs. And it needs more private sector jobs. Your industry is so important in this state. You're always one of the top 5 employers in the private sector. You're one of the top 5 taxpayers in the private sector. So we need to have more. Our state right now suffocates a lot of companies. It's happening a little less in your world, but it's happening. But if you're a farmer, if you're a rancher, the rules and regulations are crushing you. If you're in the cattle business, the rules and regulations are taking land away from you where your cow grazes. If you're a home builder, there's so many rules and regulations now. You have to put EV chargers in every garage, even if you're never going to have a person who wants an EV charger. So what's happened in this state, things have gotten all out of balance, and it's very, very hard to have a company here because of the rules and regulations. But what really stops companies from growing, what really stops jobs from being built, what really causes grandkids from leaving is our bad education and our crime and our border. Because I've been in the chair of a big company deciding where are we going to locate. And I got my packages, and the first thing on those packages when you're choosing among 10 cities is crime and education. And I can't even imagine what it would be like for a CEO of a company trying to relocate to read about Albuquerque's crime and Albuquerque's education, and then to go make a straight-faced argument to their board of directors and say, I really want to go to Albuquerque, and I know I can somehow avoid the crime problem and avoid the education problem. So these are imperatives. We want Albuquerque to be a city where your kids stay, where your grandkids stay, where young people come, where old people come, where great businesses come. And we have to fix the crime problem, and we have to fix our education problem. So that's why those will be my priority, and I'm very, very hopeful both of those areas can be changed if we have the right mix of leadership. So that's really those are my platforms. Let me just update you on the race. And it really doesn't matter what party you're in. I want to really emphasize a couple things. I'm running as someone who is a bipartisan, common sense centrist. I'm running as a Republican, but a very moderate level-headed Republican. And at this point, it's really important that all of you realize it's election season. Early voting starts October 8th. November 5th is just around the corner. So it's a great time for all of you to spend some reading and some analysis on who do you want as your leaders. It's a great time to talk to your friends, your kids, your neighbors, and remind people that it's voting season and it's important to figure out who you're for. I don't care if it relates to me or not, and go vote. And so as you go through that, there's lots of ways you can get involved. You can simply put up signs in your yard. You can help make phone calls with phone banks. You can help with door-to-door efforts. You can help with get-out-the-vote efforts. But because New Mexico is in such a bad state, it's really important for everyone, and especially all of you in this industry, that needs New Mexico to be a wonderful platform that you can, with great joy and great pride, introduce your clients to and welcome your clients into. So that's it for now for my speech, and I'll just open up to a few questions. I know that we're already probably way past everything, but maybe just 3 questions. Yeah, sure.
What do you love about what you do?
Oh, what do I love about what I do? So, first of all, probably like all of you in this room, I really believe in business. I think that people get so much dignity and so much confidence and such an exhilarating feeling when they have a good job and when they know that that job can turn into a better job if they work hard and study and learn. And people feel such pride when they can come home after a good day at work and know they're providing for their children or they're providing for their elderly parent. So I've always been a believer really in capitalism, that the private sector, that companies are the heart and soul of communities. And I still remember when my dad died, there was a funeral in the baseball field here, and there was screens of him being interviewed when he was young. And I still remember him saying, you know, my goal was always to have New Mexico be more like 70% private sector. And it hadn't gotten there yet. It's more like 70% public sector. And so I love working in business because I believe in and of itself it is a cause. It gives joy, power, freedom, independence, confidence, and dignity. And that's important to thousands and thousands of people. Any other questions? Sure.
I appreciate the subjects that you brought up, but one thing, and I'm speaking for me as a hotelier, is homelessness.
Right.
We've been experiencing several homeless camps, theft, and fentanyl overdoses at our properties. And I would just like to know what you would not so much attack, but help us with this serious problem.
So homelessness is a huge problem in this city, and it's bigger in this city than most of the states. And I'm completely aware of what you're talking about. And there's like probably 4 big drivers of homelessness. You need to get at these root drivers, right? So one of the drivers is fentanyl. That's why we our borders need to block the flow of this fentanyl. So that's one problem. Another problem is we have a lot of veterans who have mental health issues because we're not providing them with adequate care for mental health issues that they incurred representing our country. So there's lots of state-of-the-art post-traumatic stress syndrome therapies and medications and ways where we could help those veterans. Then there's also just a lot of mentally ill people who are homeless. And our mental health programs here in this state are woefully inadequate. Our behavioral health care centers were all closed down about 10 years ago. So this number is terrible. We have 20% of the healthcare providers we need for mental illness right now. 20%. So we need a real surge in social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists to help people so they do not get mentally ill. Albuquerque is another theme, or another route, is Albuquerque is a sanctuary city. I'm not convinced that sanctuary cities, the way they're set up now, are helping anyone. So I'm not saying we shouldn't have them, but the current form they're in right now, I think they create a huge amount of problems for everyone, and there's really very, very little benefit. And the federal government does give funding to sanctuary cities, so as a United States Senator, I can focus a lot on what should the role of a sanctuary city be. The federal government also funds a lot of mental health, so it could help bring mental health here. So I really think the homeless problem is a combination of a lot of different problems. I don't know if you all follow in Albuquerque and New Mexico, but particularly in Albuquerque, there's all sorts of funding going for our children, youth, and families. But we have a huge problem with young children living with abusive parents. And the value system right now in Albuquerque is that we should always try to get the child back in the home. Always try to get the child back in the home. Well, as your United States Senator, I would question that, because there's lots of evidence that we are actually spending huge amounts of money and putting these children back into these terrible homes repeatedly. And our children, no matter how you rank them, are ranked as the most unhealthy children of any state in this country, despite all the time and money and resources we're putting into them. So those children have a very high chance of being homeless. In fact, right now, on our Navajo reservations, we have the highest rate of homeless children and the highest rate of children being raised by their grandparents of almost any community in the United States. So I hope that helps a little bit. It's a big problem. Any other questions? Okay, one more. Then everybody can eat their chocolate, or I can eat my chocolate.
I just feel, my question would be more of a comment and question, just because I like the ideals you stand by and the closed border and all that. I know the biggest thing that Americans are facing now is probably being divided because of politics. How do you think you can help close that gap instead of bettering our state and doing these positives, but also helping the division between each party of politics?
I don't know if everybody could hear, but he was saying that it's the extreme, I'm putting words in your mouth, that it's the extremism between the extreme radical progressives on the left and the extreme Republicans on the right, and the tension between those two extremes are actually like a roadblock because they're not working together. And so I completely agree with your point. And I'm really running to create a tent that's in the middle and that goes from the middle out and may or may not pick up the people on the far ends. And what we really have, even my own campaign team right now, there's many very level-headed, moderate Democrats who are losing in the primary to some extreme Democrats. And they're getting crushed within their own party by the extremist. And so we're actually reaching out to those people and saying, look, we think about things basically pretty much the same, 70% the same, we're all on the same team, let's figure out how to work together. But I think the real way you do that is you start with a point of view that, we're all going to disagree on some things, but let's find the 60, 70, or 80% that we do agree on and move the state forward and not be so frozen in those extreme views. But I was also, our parents really have a big influence on us, the values that were taught as a child and as a teenager. And I was taught and led by my father, who was he usually won by 70% here. He was almost no party, He helped everyone in the state and he helped all the problems in the state. Okay, well, thank you all. It was great to be here. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Beautiful.